All right, well, we're here today at Fort Belknap with Rhett Kearns. Rhett is a reenactor, I guess you'd say. Yeah, that kind of thing. And one of the things that he likes to do to reenact is that of a 2nd Dragoon. The 2nd Dragoons are kind of a fancy, famous group that still exists today. And I think one of the only Dragoon companies regiment in the United States Army.
That's right. Yeah. They're stationed out of Germany.
That is really cool. Now, a lot of people don't know what a Dragoon is, all right? And now, Dragoons were really big, really popular about the Mexican-American War. There was a lot of Dragoon fighting there. And in the Dragoons at the battle, Resaca de las Palmas was one, I think. A lot of Dragoons won. And anyway, and then the Dragoons survived on until, well, into the 1850s. And he's going to tell us about the 2nd Dragoons at Fort Cabot. All right, Rhett, go ahead.
Thank you. So, I'm portraying Company E specifically of the 2nd Dragoons at Fort McCabot. McCabot was one of the sister forts to Fort Belknap, and it was commanded by a man named Colonel Charles May, who was very flamboyant Southerner, and he loved fancy uniforms. And this would be the uniform of the Dragoons of the 1850s. It looks like a cavalry uniform, but the Dragoons' official branch color in this time would be orange. And when they were given frock coats with the shakos like this, their trim color was orange. Now, they wore these uniforms in garrison, but when they were out on the field, they had something a lot more practical, such as civilian pants, usually corduroy. They had overshirts that would just pull over and were made of a coarse material, or a flannel shirt, or a civilian jacket, wide brim hat, where they would grow their hair out. They would look like a very rough, ragtag group of men, because out there on the Texas frontier, these uniforms wouldn't last too long. But as far as the uniform goes, these are French inspired. I have brass shoulder scales, which look pretty, but they're not practical at all. I have the model 1833 Dragoon Saber, which is a very heavy cavalry saber, and it was nicknamed the wrist breaker because if you didn't hold it right, if you hit the enemy in the wrong area or in something too hard, you would break your wrist. In fact, this is an original piece right here. So very straight, not very good for slicing the enemy. They were intended really just to club and break their bones. And then 1860, the saber got a lot more curve, which reduced the risk of injury to the man using it.
This is an original. This is a reproduction. That's an original. Mid 19th century series.
That's right. It's dated 1863 on the blade. I'll show it close.
You realize how cool that is?
So,
wow.
On my right side, I have a 1847 Musketoon, which is just like the long musket that the infantry is using, but it's shortened down for better use on horseback, and it has a saddle ring so that I could carry it on my person while on horse and shoot and load from horseback. The ramrod does not completely withdraw. It comes out and it is held on by this swivel so that I may load it without dropping the ramrod. And the tip just broke off there.
Screw,
I'll fit, yeah. It's an old piece, but I can fix it. So, but that's such as the life of the men on the frontier. They always had difficulty keeping their stuff maintained. So a lot of times when they didn't use their uniforms, they just had them on parade occasions or in garrison at places like Fort McCabot and Belknap. But when they were out in the field, they were using a little more practical items. Excuse me. So this would be an example of one of those hickory shirts that they would be wearing. All it is a pullover shirt. It's made of wool flannel, and it's got thick, heavy buttons. Of course, I have a double-barrel shotgun, which is great in almost any circumstance, unless you were beyond 100 yards. And then we would also have our Colts Dragoon Revolvers. powered by the Colt Walker, which is the largest black powder handgun ever made by Colt. It was one of the most powerful handguns in the world, but it had some issues that needed to be resolved, such as the loading lever did not hook in. The Dragoon pistol fixed that. They also shortened the barrel down. It was just a little bit lighter, and it was very effective for not only killing a man, but also killing a horse. And that was the purpose of the Dragoons being out here on the frontier, was to chase down the hostile Indians that roamed the fields. And so having a big pistol that could bring down their horse was just as effective as killing a man. The problem with the Dragoons at this time is that they were heavy cavalry, and they were very much weighed down by all their gear and all their equipment. So Comanche ponies could ride about 50 to 60 miles in a day, because all they had on them was the man, the rider, and their bows and arrows and spears. With the Dragoons, you had the saddle, you had the man, you had the musket, the sword, the cartridges, the extra cartridges, the food, the blankets, and any extra tack that they may need. So the Dragoons only covered about 25 to 30 miles in a day. So it was not an effective experiment that they tried, but it wasn't until about 1870 that the light cavalry with repeating rifles was able to make effective use of controlling the plains.
Well, all right. Well, can you talk about the difference between cavalry and dragoons?
Absolutely. So the experiment the Army tried in the early 1850s was to mount infantry on horseback, and that's really what a dragoon is. It's just mounted infantry. So infantry march on foot, and they fight with their muskets and their bayonets. Dragoons are the same men, but with short muskets and swords instead of bayonets, and they are trained to ride to where they need to be, dismount, and fight on foot.
Whereas the cavalry soldiers, they fought on horseback, either with their sabers or with their sidearms, mostly, and at full gallop and stuff like that. Their thing was to engage on horseback. The dragoons were mounted infantry, and their job was to get there, get off, and then fight as infantry.
Absolutely.
But it's only something I only recently learned, and so the difference between the dragoon and infantry, I never really thought about that. But I mean, not infantry, but cavalry. Cavalry, they really don't carry long guns, for fighting. They use their hammers. Now, your dragoon pistol that you had there, is that a cap and ball? Is that what that is?
Yes, it is a cap and ball revolver. So you would pour powder into each cylinder, and then you would push a patched ball in it, rotate the cylinder, and then you would force the ball home using the loading lever. And then once that's done, you would take a percussion cap and put it on one of these hollow studs back here called the nipple cone. And then when the hammer was pulled all the way back, trigger pulled, the cap popped, powder exploded, and the ball flew out.
Now, were the cylinders covered with wax or fat or something like that sometimes after loading them?
No, it was just a greased patch with the ball on top, and when it was pressed down, the ball was
would be expanded enough.
It would be, yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and do that thing, so you wouldn't do that. I've heard, especially guys, cowboys and things like that, their guns would be loaded for a long time, and then they would put the grease wax or something like that on top. Have you heard that?
I've heard of that, but I think that's more of a reenactorism to keep the powder in without using a live round.
Oh.
But I saw one of these in a museum up in Washington State where what was it called? It was where the Battle of Steptoe's Butte took place in southeast Washington. They found one of these in 1960, about 100 years after the battle took place, and it was still loaded, and every chamber had a conical ball sitting on top of it inside the chamber. So they didn't put anything on top of it. The ball was put in the patch, and that's without.
It was a conical ball.
Yes.
And not a round ball.
They could use both round balls and conical balls, but conical was more common and was more effective.
And well, it would be more common at sealing it for sure.
Absolutely, yes. That was what it did. Was the patch in there would help the lead ball seal any gaps in there, so it remained waterproof.
Now, your Musketoon, since we're talking about weapons here, is that rifled?
It is not. It is a smooth bore.
Okay, and so it's loaded with a regular just ball ammo.
Yes.
And muzzle loaded.
It could be loaded with buckshot or buck and ball, which is both buckshot and a round ball, or just a simple round ball.
and then this was the shotgun shells.
Right. Well, actually, this is a muzzle loader.
That's a muzzle loader shotgun.
Yeah. So.
I don't know if I've ever. It is. I see that now, and I've never thought about that.
Yeah. They had pinfire break actions in the 1850s, but they were very expensive.
Okay.
And they were kind of underpowered.
Really?
Yeah. They had a pin that stuck out of the top instead of the center part. The center fire came out in the 1870s, but before then it was just a muzzle loader where you put the caps on the back, and you could measure your own powder and put as much shot in there as you wanted to. As long as
Okay, but so neither one of them had a carry for a rifle. So Dragoons didn't really participate in the Civil War that much?
there were some. I'm not an expert on the Dragoons in the Civil War, but I do know that there were several groups of them that did, particularly in Texas. In fact, at McCavitt, there was a group called the 1st Texas Mounted Rifles.
Right.
Which was
Sounds like a Dragoon.
It is. It is basically a Dragoon unit, and I believe it was the 7th Texas Mounted Rifles. That there was a surviving uniform of their captain, and his double-breasted dress uniform was worn and trimmed, and they were called mounted rifles, but they were effectively Dragoons.
Yeah, sure. And the Army's good about